Joining me right now is Georgia Senator and member of Budget, Banking, and Armed Services Committees, David Perdue. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria.
So as a member of the Armed Services Committee, what's your reaction to this morning?
Well, first of all, let's don't take for granted that the U.S. Navy is on the scene. We always take that for granted, but the best of America is out there doing our bidding. Secondly, this is very serious. We saw 4 attacks in the last month. We know who's doing this, and it's time it stops. But I think the other thing, the point that was just made, I want to highlight, and that is that we could be in a much more vulnerable position from a market point of view and from a supply point of view had President Trump over the last couple of years not removed some of the regulations that were hindering our production. We're the largest producer of oil now, natural gas in the world. So, but we've got to come. This has got to come to a stop in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. So this is very serious.
Well, what can you tell us about the last attack? These were the Saudi tankers attacked in the Gulf, raising fears of conflict. I mean, do we know if any of this is connected?
Well, we certainly, I mean, who else in the region is going to be attacking Saudi tankers? But in all candor, I think a lot of that's going to be coming out publicly over the next few days. And I don't want to comment on that right here, but I will say this. I think the U.S. Navy has done the right thing. Secretary or Chief Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, sent aircraft carrier and another frigate into the Persian Gulf just a few weeks ago, and we now see why. These tensions are real, and Iran has got to get the message that we won't tolerate. Look, we have free trade around the world because of one reason. The U.S. Navy has secured safe sea lanes across the world. That's why the South China Sea is an important issue, and the Gulf of Oman as well. So this is a precept of global trade that we've got to stand for.
But is this, I guess what I'm asking is, do you see this as a wider conflict, Senator? Because, okay, you don't want to go too much into whether or not these two things are connected, the Saudi tankers sabotaged and what we saw overnight. But there's no coincidence that you've got more unrest here and attacks. Are we looking at a wider and deeper issue with the Middle East right now?
Well, Iran has said that they'll test our resolve. And I think one thing that the United States has always said is we're going to have open shipping lanes in that region and around the world. So whether it's broader or not, I can't comment on that right now. But I think Iran has got to see the truth that we're going to stand up for the precept of free trade and safe sea lanes.
Should the U.S. be responding here?
Well, we are responding. The USS Bainbridge is right there. One reason why we don't have deaths out there is because you have the U.S. Navy helping these sailors and making sure that everybody can be taken care of. So, yeah, we are responding.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. Good point, obviously. Let me ask you, switch gears, ask you about a budget deal. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell holding a high-stakes meeting yesterday with Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin and White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. I guess this is the latest attempt to ink a deal and avert another government shutdown. Secretary Mnuchin says that he would like to see the debt ceiling be part of that deal. What would you like to see?
Well, the debt ceiling has never worked. I mean, our debt is racing away from us because of our mandatory expenditures, which have nothing to do with this budget conversation, by the way. This is all about discretionary budget, which is only about 25% of our total spending. But we've been talking since January, actually, Maria, about trying to get 8 people in a room, decide what the top level spending is going to be, get past the budget cap crisis, and move on to fund the government. We only have 17 working days between now and 31 July, which effectively means that if you don't get some deal done on defense and HHS, you're not going to get it done before the end of the fiscal year, which we only have 27 days left before the end of September.
I mean, is there anything that can be done to avoid these last-minute scrambles that we see every time we're facing a deadline for the budget?
Maria, you and I have talked about this. You talk about it on your show repeatedly. I've been working on this 4.5 years. This is nonsense. The Congress has only funded the federal government on time in the last 45 years since the 74 Budget Act was put into place 4 times, only 4 times. Last year was the first time we got to 75% within 22 years. So this is a tremendous problem, and we've got to fix it. We've been working with a Joint Select Committee last year. I have a bill that we're putting in right now that will change the way we fund the federal government. It's high time that we do. The American people expect it. This is the first thing we have to do to attack the long-term debt problem as well.
Yeah, let's talk about your bill, the Fix Funding First Act, yesterday, a proposal to enforce real consequences when Congress does not fund the government on time, like cutting recess or cutting pay. Do you think that's going to fly?
Well, it flies in most states right now, Maria. 44 states have a balanced budget law, but more importantly, they also have consequences. If they don't get the budget done at the end of their 40 or 45-day period, nobody goes home. In most states, that's a law. I believe in this instance here, we have kicked the can down the road 186 times in the last 45 years using continuing resolutions, which absolutely handcuffs our military and causes costs to go up dramatically. So we're the culprits here in the U.S. Congress. We need to fix this right now. This is a stakeholder, and it does a couple of things. It makes the budget a law. What we long-term want to do is have all expenditures come under the budget process, and we want real consequences if we don't get this done.
And the issue is the debate over defense spending or entitlement spending, what?
Well, that's what it generally comes down to is, one side wants more entitlement spending, one side wants more defense spending, but it's much larger than that, Maria. We have over $3 trillion of mandatory expenses today. Look, in the last 2 years, you called out, our interest expense has gone up $450 billion with these 9 increases in Fed fund rates. So this is a very serious issue. We'll be spending more on interest within 5 years than we are on our military.
And we may see interest rates, well, we're expecting the Fed to talk about a cut in rates next week, actually. The Federal Reserve is meeting next week. We're expecting another interest rate decision. It's unlikely that the Fed is going to cut rates. But at this point, it's more likely that we see a cut this year, later this year, as opposed to a hike. But still, the rate is obviously a big expense.
Well, at $22 trillion, you can do the math. And the duration of that bond portfolio when President Trump took office was under 3 years. That's the other crisis that we don't talk about a lot. But we are moving on it right now. The economy is growing. That's lowered the debt curve considerably. We've got to fix this budget process, cut out redundant agencies. But sooner or later, politicians in Congress are going to have to deal with the mandatory side of this equation by saving Social Security and saving Medicare. Do
you think if the president wins a second term, he'll address that?
I do. I really do. I've had these conversations with him. I think this is a second-term issue for any president. We all know that if you're going to deal with the $22 trillion debt over the long period of time, you've got to deal with these. And by the way, the crisis will force us to deal with that, whether we do it in his second term or not. Medicare trust fund goes to zero in 7 years, and Social Security trust fund goes to zero in 12 years, Maria.
Wow, an incredible number. Senator, good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
Good to see you.
Senator David Perdue joining us.